Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Scale Up JFrog Artifactory for the Enterprise. Before we start, just a few small logistical details. This webinar will be recorded, and you will get the recording by email, and also we will publish it on YouTube in just a few days. And if you have any questions, please remember to write them in the question box, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the session. And I would also like to use this opportunity to tell you where you can come and meet the frogs. At the moment, we are in KubeCon in Copenhagen. So if by any chance you are there, or if you know that one of your colleagues are there, please feel free to stop by at our booth. We will also be in London for the DevOps Enterprise Summit from June 25 to 26. And this year, we are also organizing our annual Jenkins User Conference in partnership with CloudBees in Paris on the 28th of June and in Tel Aviv on July 3rd. So if you would like to arrange a one-on-one meeting, or if you would like to receive discount codes, feel free to reach out to us. So that is it from me now, and I'm handing it over to my colleague, Jan.
Thank you, Nora. Well, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. So before jumping, to these the main topics, well, I will talk a bit about myself. So I'm Jan Chasin, solution engineer at JFrog. So the solution engineering team helps our customers to be successful in their DevOps transformation by giving them advices and also guiding them on how to use our products in the most efficient way. We are also aside, I would say, technical sessions with customers. We're also doing webinars, we're writing blogs and papers, and also attending conferences, like you saw in the previous slide. We were, for instance, at KubeCon at London and also at DevOps France. So let's go directly into the agenda. So this is so in this webinar today. So I'll be explaining exactly, which challenges you may be facing when trying to scale up, your CI/CD. So with Artifactory, and how you would take advantage of the different features that the Enterprise Pack would offer you. So first, we'll start with going with a recap or summary on how you would use the JFrog products during your continuous delivery process. Then we'll go with a study, I would say, on the different scaling up use case. See which question you'd be asking yourself when scaling up. We'll see that scaling up would be having more people involved or more binaries. We will see also then after seeing these different use cases or case studies, we'll see that the challenges that you may face trying to implement these different solutions. And at the end, well, I will show you exactly what the JFrog products can offer you and help you, solve these different challenges. All right, so basically, we'll jump directly into the first part, the Artifactory overview. We'll do a really brief recap on how Artifactory can fit. Okay, you can use Artifactory by implementing your CI/CD process. So the story will start, with a dev team. Okay, so this dev team will actually lead a project and will require, a build tool to create and to build that project. So here, this is a different, build tool that Artifactory can work with. So you've got, Maven, Gradle for Java, NuGet for .NET, or even, Docker or NPM. The idea would be to use Artifactory as a proxy to resolve the dependencies required by your project. So you would plug, your build tool to Artifactory, and it's going to be up to Artifactory to reach these, I would say, remote repositories like JSON for Java, for instance, or Docker Hub to match Docker images. So Artifactory will plug to this remote repository, fetch them, keep them locally, okay, for the next request, and then serve them to your dev team, to your different dev teams. And then also you may be also using X-Ray. As here in this process, you would be downloading, dependencies from remote repository. You would like to be sure that they don't contain any vulnerabilities. Well, you would use X-Ray to scan your packages and to inform you that you're building your projects, on sane or safe dependencies. With X-Ray, you can also, by the way, perform a licenses checks to make sure that the licenses from your dependencies are compliant with your final product. Well, if you go back to the process, in the meantime, your dev team would commit their changes to their VCS, so like GitLab, GitHub, or even SVN, if you're still using SVN. The CI server will take over, to build the project. So we have dedicated plugin for Jenkins, TFS, Bamboo, and TeamTD, but we have other ways, also to integrate with other CI servers using actually the CLI. And the CI server will do exactly the same process that it was done locally on the developer workstation. So we will during the build, your CI server will resolve your dependencies from Artifactory, and hopefully all these dependencies would have been downloaded during the dev phase. So the resolution part will be faster because getting all the dependencies from Artifactory directly without reaching, the remote repositories. And then you would, at the end of your build, you will not only deploy your artifact to Artifactory, but also what we call the build info, which is actually a build of material, which could be composed of your generated artifacts, the dependencies, and the environment variables in order actually, to reproduce your build. When it's done, when you push your artifact, you will be, some other teams will be able to contribute to your project by applying metadata or properties. So the idea, for instance, if you want to include a step where the QA team will give its validation, you can add a property to your binaries, to your artifact, like QA.status equal validated. So you'll be able, to apply these properties manually or using the API to automate the process. The final step would be, to plug your provisioning tool or your deployment tool to download your releases, your binaries from Artifactory, and deploy them to Artifactory and to deploy them to your production servers. So this is, the big picture on how Artifactory will help you to implement this automated pipeline from dev to production. So here, this process, you've been testing this process, it's been working. So you may want, to expand this process to different teams, okay, to really generalize, I would say, this process and to involve more people, more team, more projects. And this is actually what you will get, on the different use case studies. This is what you can get. So you will involve more teams, more people, more projects, and this will lead to, also more binaries, but also, more connections to your Artifactory during the resolution part, and also during at build time for resolution and publishing. At the same time, also your deployment tool will, connect to your Artifactory, and here you have more and more connection to your Artifactory, and this may lead to break, this instance. And Artifactory may be here in this specific case a spot, a single point of failure. So this is one of the challenges that you may face having this going in this situation. Another point also would be, as you'll be having more projects, more binaries, where you may be facing this issue, where your storage, will reach its limits and will lead your Artifactory down. So this would be, the two first challenges. Make sure that your Artifactory is not a spoof, and you to keep your CI/CD always up and running, and also make sure that your data will still be available. Another challenge is when talking about scaling up would be, to work with distributed teams. For instance, you have one site with your Artifactory and all your CI/CD tools and your dev teams, where when scaling up, you would like, like I said, to expand this process to different teams, not forcibly in the same location, but into different locations. So that could be different dev teams, or ops team, because you may have production servers on different locations. So you'll have to deal with different teams, different sites. And the question would be, well, how do we make them work together? How do we share binaries? How do I deploy, my binaries to different sites? And maybe how do I link, or I would like to share binaries between, specific sites. So how do I manage these different flows during my CI/CD process? So we'll see, if I just do a recap, these are the different challenges that you may be facing when scaling up. So how, to make sure that your continuous delivery process will keep running whatever the traffic or the load. How to make sure that, my storage won't fail during my CD, to make sure that I can rely on my storage. Third point would be, well, how do I manage distributed teams? Like, how do I expand, my delivery process to different teams on different sites? So basically, first challenge. So this is the part where I will explain you how you can solve this. I would say these not pain points, but challenges with JFrog products, with Artifactory, especially. So you will actually, to be sure that your CI/CD is always up and running, well, you would create, a cluster, an Artifactory cluster, to manage heavy loads. So the idea would be here, to put a load balancer in front of your Artifactory instances. And actually, you know what, I will explain a bit more on how you would create a cluster with Artifactory, because it's a bit more complicated than what you are currently seeing. What you would need actually is this, to have, first a single database, an externalized database, to be sure that your metadata, which are stored in this database, will be available for all your instances. And you don't want your database to be a spoof, a single point of failure. So you'll have to externalize this database, and so externalize from Artifactory, and implement a cluster of your database. So you'll have to do this by yourself. So for instance, with MySQL, you can use the NDB cluster. That's an example. But you can go with with any relational database like Postgres or Oracle, which are the most common ones. And also, this cluster will be connected to the same file store. So by default, we are saving all the binaries on your local file system. But here, you'll be able to use an NFS storage or an object storage like S3. I'll be talking more about this, this part on the next slide. Also, you need to make sure that in this cluster, all your Artifactory instances would be communicating to each other. So you have to make sure that they are really, I would say, they are really close to each other. Especially, if you when we are talking about HA, high availability, you may implement this structure or architecture onto different data centers. So if you want to do so, you have to meet this requirement. Okay, so to make sure that the latency between each of your nodes is below 10 milliseconds. And I would say best practices would be to say the lower the better. Okay, if you have a latency around 1 millisecond or 2 milliseconds, for instance, if you got a fiber connection between your different data centers, that should be around 1 or 2 milliseconds of latency. That should be fine. You'll be able to implement this cluster on different data centers. You also have the same kind of requirements, especially during the connection between the nodes and the database. Here we really require a really low latency around 1 millisecond. Don't try to implement a cluster with higher latency. Okay. And this is actually how you can manage or create this HA cluster to make sure that your Artifactory, which is actually a central piece of your CI/CD pipeline, will still be here when managing heavy loads or high traffic. Another I would say feature of having this kind of cluster would be to perform zero downtime upgrades. You'll be using Artifactory for your CI/CD pipeline, and you will need to upgrade your CI/CD tools, and Artifactory is one of them. So you'll have to make sure that you can upgrade without impacting your service. So with Artifactory, you can reach this, you can implement this zero downtime upgrade with a cluster. So basically, when you implement a cluster, you will have a primary node and a secondary node. The difference would be that the primary is exactly like a secondary node, but it will have more management tasks, I would say. For instance, the primary node will be in charge of triggering the garbage collection, which is basically the routine which will delete the unnecessary, I would say, or unwanted binaries. Also, it will take care, for instance, of the replication system that I will talk also in the next slides. So the idea here to perform a zero downtime upgrade, what you would do is to take out the primary node out of the load balancer pool, perform an upgrade, okay, on this single node. So you will also, upgrade. It may impact the database, but make sure don't worry. While you upgrade the Artifactory primary node, the secondary nodes will be still up and running, and you will still be able to download and upload binaries from the secondaries. What will be missing when the primary node is down is this management task, like I was saying, like the garbage collection, replication, but also the administrative task if you want to change some configurations. And when you're done, when upgrading your primary, well, you can take it back into the load balancer pool, and then do the same process for each of the secondary nodes. So one by one, you will be upgrading your nodes to achieve this, zero downtime upgrade. This is the second, things to have in mind when implementing an HA cluster. So this was actually how to solve, the first challenge to keep your CI/CD always up and running. The second step would be, to step with challenges. Sorry, is to how to make sure that that you will still be accessing your data, whatever I would say the charge or traffic. So here we'll be talking about implementing a reliable and scalable storage. When I say reliable, it's really to make sure that you won't lose data. And for that, we will introduce the notion of redundancy, which means having different copies, of the same artifact in your file store. So we have different ways to implement this, solution, this reliable and scalable storage, using what we call a sharded file store. So here, your file store will be actually composed of sub-components, sub-pieces, okay? And I will explain that we have actually different ways to implement this sharded file store, with NFS and without NFS. So we'll see it's still, you'll be able to implement this sharded file store with NFS or without NFS, and we'll see the differences. You can also implement, this solution using an object storage. And here, what's going to happen is actually we delegate some features like the reliability or redundancy of your data to your object storage solution. So that could be an on-prem solution, an object storage on-prem, or in the cloud, like an S3 bucket, GCP, or Azure Blob Storage. But let's go with the first sharded file store with the NFS. So basically, this is the sharded file store with NFS, what we call actually at JFrog the file store sharding. So you can see that you have a sharded file store composed of different mounts or different shards. Here, a shard would be an NFS mount point. You can see on this slide that we have 3 mount points, 3 shards, and a redundancy of 2, meaning that for each of your artifacts, you will have 2 copies spread onto these different mount points. So if we switch to, I would say a more architectural point of view, you will have this here. So you have, on the VM, you'll have your Artifactory instance, you have your database externalized on different server. And you will have, on your NFS server or NAS, your file store, your different shards. And you'll have to mount, this shard onto your machine, on the machine hosting your Artifactory. And that would be the different shards. So so what's going to happen here in the process is when you upload a binary to Artifactory, or when you're downloading from a foreign server or like JCenter or Maven Central a new binary, it will go from Artifactory to your file store. And so it's going to be up to Artifactory to I would say to store your binaries onto a mount point, onto a shard. So you have to delegate this read and write behavior to Artifactory. Okay, so by default, Artifactory will write your binary on the shard which has the less occupied spaces also. In between, you can see that we've got a ROU cache, which is a read cache. Okay, basically, when you upload something to your binary to your file store, a copy will still be here, will be stored into this read cache, and then it will optimize your download process because Artifactory will, get your newly your newly uploaded binaries from this cache, and it will not get them directly from the binary store. If your binary is not in this cache, it will get them from the file store. So this is a least recently used cache. So basically, the idea would be, well, the more a binary is stored and the longer it will stay in this cache because it's already in cache. You can extend, this the file store sharding to different nodes. So here, this would be a cluster, okay, an HA cluster with 2 nodes. And what you would do is to mount, the shards to the other machine. And this is how you can, implement this file store sharding with one node, with a standalone, or with a HA cluster. So you may be wondering how you implement this, and actually I will show it to you. So everything, all the configuration of your file store will be set up into one file, the binary store.xml. Out of the box, so this is the file. Out of the box, we can use directly, a template. So here you've got the different, the double shard template would be having 2 shards and a redundancy of 1. So so you can either use directly only, have this line in your only this line in this in your binary store.xml, or here, I mean, for the purpose of this webinar, I show you what is exactly in this template. So you can see that I've got the cache FS, okay, the ROU cache. And then I've got the provider, which is the sharding. So you can see the redundancy of 1. And then you can see the different shards, the 2 shards. You can set a redundancy of 2, here. and that would match the another template out of the box template, which is the redundancy shard. But if you want to to customize your file store, you can add more shards and change the redundancy. So here, by the way, you can see that for each shard I mentioned, I specified the locations. So if we switch to the second solution, which is the sharded file store with a without NFS, well, the principle will be the same. But what you can see is we don't have an NFS server, but we'll have independent machine. We'll have a machine with an Artifactory and a file store. And here, so to implement this cluster file system, you will need at least 2 nodes. So you will see here, I've got my super file. I've got a file. I would say a super file store, which will be composed of file store A and file store B. And this file store will be actually managed not by in the previous example you'd be using the NFS share to manage your file store. Here, everything will be managed by Artifactory. So to manage the redundancy and the resolution part of your artifact. Okay, Artifactory will be dealing on this aspect. You will still have the same database, and so among an HA cluster and this cache. By the way, so the cache are not synchronized. By the way, okay. And this is the cluster file system. So without NFS, you'll be able to manage different, I would say, let's call them independent file store, which will be gathered through Artifactory to compose this super file store. And if we look at the configuration, you will have this. So I will into the binary store.xml. Okay, so you have out of the box, you can use the chain, this template, a cluster file system. But if you want to be able to tune it a bit more, so this is what you can see here. You'll be able to do it. Okay. So you can get, by the way, you can get all the information from our wiki, which is publicly available. And if you need, specific details, just have a look to our wiki. So you can see the cache FS, the LRU cache, and also the sharding cluster mechanism. And so I won't explain all the configuration, but you can see that we'll be able to tune any, I would say, any layer. You'll be able to specify, for instance, a cache for your cache FS or LRU cache or read cache. And then you'll be able to specify, in the sharding cluster provider. If you look at here, you will be able to set, well, for the read and write behavior, for now, we only have the cross-network strategy. So you have to rely on our Artifactory. But if you want to set the redundancy, you will still be able to do it in this configuration. So this was the configuration for the cluster file system. And the last solution would be using an object storage. And here, all the reliability and scalability would be, I would say, delegate to your object storage. So you can, by the way, yeah, I just forgot to mention, but the reliability of your, of your data would be managed by the redundancy, okay, of the file store, and also to be able to scale up. Where in the file store sharding with NFS, you will be adding more shards that you have to specify in your binary store. Okay, so you have to restart your Artifactory to take into account this change. For the cluster file system, if you want to scale up, you have to add more nodes actually, or expand the size of your file store. And here with an object storage, well, it's going to be up to the object storage to manage the redundancy and the reliability. I will explain a bit more actually about the object storage, because as you can see, where we added another cache, which is the eventual cache, which is actually a write cache. When you deal with an object storage, what you will have to deal, one of the challenges that you might face is that the latency. Let's take an S3 bucket that will be storing your binaries into an S3 bucket. Well, when you upload an artifact, you don't want to wait for your artifact to be uploaded to your S3 bucket to be available, for your developers. So that's why we added some kind of asynchronous process. So when you upload an artifact to your Artifactory, it will remain into this cache, this read cache, and also in the eventual. So for the future request, you won't have to wait for your binaries to be uploaded to your S3 bucket, to object storage, to be able to retrieve it to your users. So you have this parallel process where any item uploaded to Artifactory will remain to this eventual cache, and you have a thread which will be running and make sure that what's inside this eventual cache will be uploaded to your S3 bucket, to your object storage, while your artifact will still remain to your cache and will be and other people or user will be able to download your binaries while it hasn't been uploaded to your S3 bucket. Yeah. And you can see that we are managing the redundancy inside your cache, the eventual cache, because that if in the case one machine goes down, the other node will be able to take over that process of uploading your binaries to your object storage. So for that, you have to have a redundancy of 2 in this case, to have a copy of your binaries here and here. Well, to have 2 copies, one here and one here. If we look at the configuration, okay, going to be the same. So in the binary store, you'll have to specify either a template, or you'll be able to specify the whole chain, okay, of what's inside this template. So by default, out of the box, actually, I would say we have a template for to be able to plug to an S3 bucket using the cluster S3 template. We have a template to plug to GCP and also to Azure. So feel free again to check out our documentation on our wiki. I will really here go very briefly because it's really similar to the cluster file system template. You have still this LRU cache. You will have here the sharding cluster, but for the eventual cache, okay. So you'll be able to manage the redundancy of your the read and write and redundancy of your eventual cache. And you can also see that you have sub-providers to manage the upload to your S3. So by default, when you install the cluster S3 template, you'll have everything here, okay? You have a retrieval mechanism. By default, you've got a retrieval of 3. And then what you need to specify is, well, the provider. So where is your S3 bucket? So endpoint, identity, credential, and etc. So just keep in mind, if you want to change your binary store, well, your binary store, just check out or modify the binary store.xml. So that would be, the section where I wanted to here on this section to, if I just recap, to show you, explain you the different ways how to implement a reliable and scalable storage. So reliable using different copies or redundancy of your data, and scalable where by adding more NFS shard if you're going with a Filestore sharding, adding more nodes to your HA cluster for the cluster file system, and actually to manage redundancy and reliability that would with the object storage that would be done through your object storage. But we still manage redundancy of your eventual cache to make sure that all your items will be uploaded to your object storage. Last part would be, I would say, is to to manage. How do you manage distributed teams? So we'll see different use case. First one would be I will show you a use case with Dev and DevOps. DevOps creating Docker image that would like to share with the Dev teams. Use case number 2 would be a way to release to production. So when I say release, it's really to not deploy to production servers, but to give access, to your ops teams to release. Third use case would be to managing dependencies between two dev teams. I will show it to you later, and then we'll see. I will show you how you can manage and monitor your different Artifactory instances with distributed teams, because you will need actually different Artifactory instances to manage this, I would say this in topology. So let's go with the first use case. Okay, I've got, like I was saying in the previous slide, I've got different teams, different locations. And let's say that I have, my my CI/CD tools platform on a main site. I will have my DevOps team in another site, which will be, in this use case, they will be creating, Docker images, the base Docker images that should be used by, the entire company. So that what they would do is to actually, I will then talk to the full story before showing you how it's implemented. So a DevOps team in a specific region and dev teams in another. So the process would be, for your DevOps team to create and distribute, I would say, their images to the developers. So they would push their Docker image, to the main site, or maybe they can push it directly through their Docker client, or store them into store the Docker file into the VCS, and then it's going to be up to Jenkins to generate the Docker image and then push them to Artifactory. And then the idea is that, well, your dev team would like to download them, to get them. And this, so how can you implement this with Artifactory? Is by adding local Artifactory instances on each of your sites. So why would you why would you have this local Artifactory, as you can have a Docker client on each of your workstations, developer workstation? Well, the idea would be, first, I'm talking about Docker images, but you would like also maybe sharing other technologies. And with Artifactory, as its universality, you'll be able to store other binaries. And also, well, with Artifactory, you'll be able to have this cache, this local cache in this site, not a cache on your developer workstation machine. So for that, actually, to implement this kind of situation, what you would do is to use the replication system. So the replication system would be, it's a way, to synchronize different repositories. So here, for instance, well, I will do a push, so replicating from A to B with a replication. You can also implement, a multi-push application, I would say. We'll see actually that we have, ways. You've got schedule replication, which basically you have to set up a routine or cron tab, which will tell you how often the replication or the synchronization will occur. And also you have the event-based replication. So in this specific case, as soon as you upload something to this repository, it will be, uploaded to the others repository. So basically, if I go to my Artifactory, you will be able to set that up, on a local and remote. So if I take a local repository, let's say for Docker, you have this replication tab where you can set, this schedule replication to make sure that your different repositories are always synchronized, and also enable the event-based push to make sure that any new items or binary push to a specific repo, it will be replicated almost in real time to the other, Artifactory or repositories. So you'll be able to add more, instances. So if we take, and using this, you'll be able to achieve what we had before. Okay, this is actually what we call a star topology with a main site and satellites. If we take, this schema, which is actually the implementation of a star topology with the previous example, that would be, from the main site, I would be replicating to other sites. Here, the idea would be, so the replication would be driven by the main site. So we have to have, an account and a specific account to be able to write into other Artifactory instances. So that was the first use case. The second use case would be to, not deal with the dev, but more with the ops team. I will still keep, my main site, but I will have a production site. The idea would be really to separate your CI/CD platform from the production side, and you don't want really to rely on your production side on the CI/CD platform side, but you would like to keep locally, all your release on each production server. Okay, and the idea would be that each production site will download the dependencies, the binaries of the releases from the CI/CD of the main site or the CI/CD platform. And for that, you will need also, you can implement or have Artifactory instances. Like I said, again, to have them locally, to be sure that, if for any reason the main site goes down, we still have releases locally. And when I talk about replication, that could be like for the previous replication and for this one, the idea would be really to have in mind that a replication will allow you to pre-populate, different Artifactory instances, and you won't need to really ask them to really download or to mention directly to download a specific artifact from a remote site. So you won't, and you will suffer, from this downloading time. Here, using the replication, you will gain time because Artifactory will pre-populate your satellite sites. Here you can see that I will show you another type of replication that would be a pull replication, and you will be using, a remote repository, which will be pulling from a local or another remote. And you can also extend this, like in the previous example, to have a to implement the star topology. So one main site and satellites. But here, the replication will be driven by the satellites. Here on the left, it's driven by the main site. But here, the pull replication, because it's not the push, but the pull replication, will be driven by the remote, by the satellites. Why would you go with one or the others? Well, it's really in terms of who's driven what. In the first example, the replication was driven by the main site, so we had the read and write, permissions. Here for production, what you would like to do is not give, the write permission to the main site, but rather, let the production servers or the production sites lead the replication to download, pull what they need to pull. And here you don't need to have a write permission. So if we look at not different at this how you can implement the star topology using a pull replication, well, this is what's going to happen. You will set the pull replication from the remote. And quickly, if I show you on the interface what you would do on Artifactory, it's like for the local repository, you will do let's take a Docker remote, for instance, and you'll be able to set a replication. Again, here you have a schedule replication, we call it a current expression, and an event-based pull replication. So this is how we can implement the star topology. I will quickly show you, the last use case would be the managing dependencies. So here, we won't deal with the ops team or the production site, but with dev sites and different dev sites which will have their own, CI/CD tool. And for that, the use case would be one team would be, creating an artifact or binary which will be a dependency of another team. So the idea would be to have this kind of bidirectional direction share, and you would use Artifactory to implement this. So I will show it to you how you can implement this kind of bidirectional topology of what we call full mesh. The idea would be to rely on, on the site one to create, one local repository where your CI will push your binaries, create a remote repository, a remote which will actually point to the local repository on the site 2, and you will invoke, an event-based pull replication to fetch the artifact in real time. So as soon as you have a new artifact on site 2, it will be pulled by the site 1, by the remote repository in site 1. So we do the same architecture or same kind of architecture on both sides. So one local and one remote with an event-based pull replication on the other local, and then group it inside a virtual repository to have a single URL to be able, to get the artifact generated on the site on site 1, and the one from site 2 using the same URL. So this is how you can accomplish, how you can manage these different use cases with Artifactory and the replication system. Then, so I will actually conclude this webinar by showing you how you can manage your different Artifactory instances, because with a single tool, which is actually Mission Control, how you can be able to manage them and to monitor them as well. So I will switch to my Mission Control, sorry, here. So this is Mission Control. You can see that I've got different, this is the home page. I've got different sites. I've got my Amsterdam site, a Bangkok site. On this Bangkok site, I've got one Artifactory, but you will also be able to manage extra instances. Okay, so actually it's a reference to my Artifactory. You won't be able to install Artifactory instances using Mission Control, but you'll be managing them. So if you want to add, another, want to add another instance, you have to spin up your instance, your Artifactory instance, and then reference it through Mission Control. To have the map view, a list view. And if I go, for instance, to my, let's go to my, well, I will show you this service. So one service is actually Artifactory or extra instance. You can see that here I've got some issues, with accessing this Artifactory instance, but I've got an online one, okay, with this specific version, the site, the kind of license. So if I go to this one, I'll have all the information about my Artifactory. So the storage summary, I will also be able to see the different replication set. It's a push, okay, replication. You'll be able to see the licenses used for this Artifactory instance. If it's an edge cluster, so here I don't have any Artifactory instance. The task summary, okay, what's running inside, actually different threads, and the system info. So you'll be able to manage everything, to manage your different Artifactory instances through the same UI and accessing, different information. Also about managing your different Artifactory instances, you will be able to actually to script your administrative task. Yeah, just rolling something. Sorry. So you'll be able to script your administrative task, and for instance, you will also be able to implement. I showed you, a star topology or a full mesh topology. You will be able to script them. Okay. So here is an example. Basically it's a Groovy script that you'll be able to use. So you could be able to script them. You'll be able to download them also from our GitHub repo. So please feel free to have an access, check our GitHub repo. And here, so I'm describing, I'm actually scripting my whole full mesh topology. But you'll be able to create, to script the creation of specific repositories, specific permissions, and etc. So you'll be able to execute your script here, for instance. We select here, and you have some kind of walkthrough, okay. And you'll be able also to specify, the different criteria. And then you'll be able to run, perform a dry run. And if it's okay for you, you can run the script on your different Artifactory instances. And last thing that you'll be able to do with Artifactory that I haven't talked about, is to implement a DR, disaster recovery instance. Basically, we will create disaster recovery using the replication system. So Mission Control will use specific API to replicate your users, your permissions, and etc. But it will use the replication system to replicate your data, to create this DR, which will be always up and running and updated. So this is what you can achieve with Mission Control, managing and monitoring your different Artifactory instances on different sites. Also, keep an eye on Mission Control, because we'll add more features, in the really close future, near future, and we'll implement, more. I would say we'll add some features. I think maybe you've heard about JFrog Insight, which to be able, to get metrics from other tools like your Git or your Jenkins and your Artifactory and X-Ray. So you'll be able to get these metrics and display them in Mission Control. So that was actually, this is actually the end of this webinar. Thank you very much for attending this session.
Yes, and if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A. We'll be happy to answer them.
So I think that we have one question, actually, which is, okay, so among all these different features, so which one are available from the Pro version? So yes, so we've got different editions, of Artifactory. We've got the OSS, the Pro, and the Enterprise. All the information that I showed you, the features, I would say, are from the Enterprise pack, which means that to be able to implement a scalable and reliable storage, this is actually part of the Enterprise pack. And to be able to create, this multi-push replication is a feature from the Enterprise pack, and the event-based pull replication is also part of the Enterprise pack. With the Pro pack, Pro edition, you will be able to perform replication, but one-to-one. So one push, a push from one to another Artifactory instances, and an event and a scheduled pull replication. So this is what you can accomplish with the different Artifactory edition. Well, I think that there is no more questions.
If you have any other questions, you can feel free to reach out to us. And as I mentioned, you will all get a link with the recording of this webinar, and it will also be available on YouTube in a few days. I'd like to thank you for joining this webinar. Thank you for spending your lunch break with us. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to hear back from you soon. Thank you, and have a great day.